Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today on the Dairy Signal. We're going to be jumping into a really great opportunity for dairy producers to maybe get a little bit of coverage on our cull cows and our cross calves here. And we're going to dive into what that looks like, what that could potentially mean for your farm, and kind of some of the how-tos, if you will. But before we do that, I have to say a huge thank you to DMI for their sponsorship of the Dairy Signal. And so this is your dairy checkoff. So a huge appreciation for making sure that we can get some great educational content to you thanks to our dairy checkoff. A little bit more about them is that whole milk now accounts for nearly 50% of fluid milk sales, and this strong track record speaks volumes about our dairy checkoff and our sponsored full fat dairy nutrition research and the consumer's newly renewed enthusiasm for whole milk. So that's an exciting fact for you as well here this afternoon. And to learn more about not only this research and their great push towards full fat milk, you can head over to dairycheckoff.com to learn how they're making every drop count. So huge thank you to DMI for their support of the Dairy Signal. I also have to say that if you're somebody who's maybe tuning in for the first time and in about a month, I mean, I'm pretty sure this marks the month date in which we've switched over platforms here and made things look just a little bit different on the user end. I want to make sure that you have your opportunity to ask your questions and still interact and engage with today's speaker as you might be familiar with. And to be able to do so, you just have to go to the bottom right-hand portion of your video screen and you'll see three little dots. And on those dots, you click those and you can ask your question. It does ask for your name. It is a required field, but if you're somebody who's maybe not feeling quite so enthusiastic about putting your name out there, feel free to just put anonymous or NA. We don't really care necessarily who's asking the question. We just want to make sure that your questions are being able to be asked for those who do feel comfortable doing so. And we also want to make sure if you're somebody, whether you're watching live or after the fact, that if you want to take that quiz to earn some CEU points, all you have to do is go to the top left-hand corner where you're going to see three lines, and you can click on that and take the quiz at any point in time. But if you're watching it live or even after, it'll automatically pop up at the end, so you don't have to worry about that unless you're taking it at a little bit different time frame. So I think that's all my housekeeping. I think that's all the good things that we have to get to before we dive into this afternoon's conversation about a topic that I think a lot of us are going to be interested in, because who doesn't want to have a little bit of risk management, especially when prices are as good as they're looking right now for our cross and cull cows. So with that being said, we have this afternoon Will Babler, who's a principal with Pinion Risk Management, and we're excited to have Will back once again. He's been on a few other times before, a little bit different name associated with the company he's with, but still the great risk management tools and knowledge that you know and love. So Will, I'm going to turn it over to you to get us started, and I know you'll go a little bit into about who Pinion is and what's the difference between where you've been to where technically you are now.
Yeah, thank you, Amber. Appreciate the intro. And yeah, same team here. We came in with that Dabbler group into Pinion about a year and change ago, and it's been a good joining of forces with our team and their group. And still the same focus in risk management, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We've had numerous discussions on dairy fundamentals, but now when you're in the dairy business, you're more or less also in the beef business, whether you realize it or not. So we're going to look at the new dairy LRP tool. Anyone who's familiar with DRP is the USDA revenue protection product. LRP is the livestock risk protection product. And as Amber mentioned, it's now dialed in for dairy producers to use with their culls and their cross calves. So that's what we're going to dig into, a little bit about Pinion. We've been in the business 20 plus years, team about 35 in the risk management group. We cover most of the country here, all focused on food and ag, providing the same services we've always provided in futures and options advisory, and then the various crop insurance. A lot of our folks come from the farm, still have ties to the farm, deep roots in the agricultural world. And overall, within the risk group, we also integrate back into Pinion, which has been around for 93 years as a leading food and ag accounting firm and now consulting firm, 750 plus people all across the country. I added a plus out in New York because we recently brought in some new team members on the dairy farm business management side of things, who are some real dairy experts out there. Anna and Ashley and Megan, we're really excited to have them part of the team. And actually, Amber brought up a great point. They've been involved in helping out with this cross calf and LRP because there's a lot of operational things that are maybe a little different than when we just think about, well, what's our milk flow on the milk check? It's a little bit of a different story when we're thinking about cross calves. So that's a little point of background on the firm and what we've been up to. Personally myself, I always like to throw the snapshot out of our farm here in Southwest Wisconsin. That's where I grew up. Milking cows, raising crops and beef, and a number of other entrepreneurial activities in the agricultural markets. Been around managing risk in the dairy world for going on 20 years, and very excited about helping share some of these new tools that are coming out. So without further ado, we'll get into that. When we think about our services, I did highlight here that we've got kind of a wide menu of things that we're doing. Really, we try to help clients focus on margins. There's all these moving parts in commodities, especially now in the beef side of things. So we help clients manage their margin. We use the revenue tools. We're going to talk about the LRP today. We still always got the traditional futures and options tools, which we'll see can be something we may prefer to use even over LRP in certain circumstances. And then, as I mentioned, with the deal in New York to expand our team, we're getting engaged more in managerial accounting, benchmarking, and other financial strategic advisory. So this is kind of what we do on a day-to-day basis. I think at the moment when the phone rings, we got plenty to talk about with clients in milk and feed, but it's often the most exciting one is on the beef side. So that's where we're going today. This is kind of the rundown of what we'll talk about. We'll look at a few of the market fundamentals. We'll look specifically on where the overall beef on dairy revenue picture fits and how that's evolved over the years. Then we'll do just the rundown on the specifics on the new LRP insurance, give you a couple examples, and we'll look at, practically how do you get started on things. So that's the plan. So we'll start in it. And this is one that definitely jumps off the page. It's pretty crazy to see where we've been. Last time we had a huge bull market in cattle was back in 2014, and then we had some harrowing times in COVID in 2020, and it's been more or less straight up since then. Depending on the day, depending on the week, been some pretty spicy market movements with limit up, limit down type price action in recent weeks. But at the end of the day, we're sitting here right at record highs on the live cattle market. We hear even crazier cash prices, 245 cash markets trading. So just unbelievable prices that I think would have been hard to fathom, in some cases months ago, let alone several years ago. So live cattle, pushing new records all the time. This translates right into the cull values. So when you think about on the dairy farm, those culls going to market, they followed a similar trajectory. Now there's basis and there's grading and there's the, ground beef versus primal cuts and all those other factors that come into this. But point being, we're seeing a record price for culls, and the value realization there is extremely high. It's a little bit interesting because dairy farmers right now are quite reluctant to cull because the replacement pipeline is really tight. So normally if you'd see this cull price, you'd see outrageously high levels of culling. We've actually seen the opposite, which is quite fascinating. You'd think that without knowing that ahead of time, you'd think it'd be the other way around. But even for those culls that are going to town, they are collecting huge, huge revenue values right now. So that's one part of the beef on dairy revenue. The other part we think about is on the feeder cattle side. Now, feeder cattle, again, very similar pattern, straight up, new record highs, incredible value there for anyone who's got feeders. And what's new is we're looking at these cross calves, Dale calves, drop calves, whatever you want to call them. If they're a cross, they've become extremely valuable to the beef industry. It's no longer $50 a head to figure out what you're going to do with a drop calf. I was talking with somebody earlier this week, and they said they remember a day they went to the sale barn, and they had four calves in the trailer. When they got out, they had seven. Someone had just put them in there because they didn't want to pay the sales fee. So those stories aren't happening anymore. It's literally the exact opposite. We're bouncing off these record highs. These are USDA numbers, which are pretty good. I've heard anything from 1250 to 1500. The USDA number is somewhere in the middle of that, and it's giving you the overall trend. A lot of value coming back from beef. So if we think about that, we go back to that concept of managing risk, not getting over fixated on a price, but thinking about it in terms of margin and revenue and profitability. This is kind of a really interesting chart that kind of looks at stacking up revenue over time for cull cows and cross calves. It's more or less the beef side of the equation traded or was valued somewhere around $1.100 forever. And then, as we've seen the beef market trade much higher, as we've seen these cross calves come into play where the buyers are very interested in them. They like the consistency, they like the performance. They're a really valuable animal. That's coincided perfectly with the bull market and the beef side of things. And the total revenue on farm, on the dairy farm from beef has just exploded. It's basically 5x in the last 5 years. So it's been a huge move higher. It's a huge portion of revenue, and it's an enormous amount of the the profit margin that's actually coming to the bottom line on a dairy today is really a lot of it's coming from the beef side of things. So this has been a great run. It's been a great opportunity for the dairy producers. We get a lot of questions about, well, what's driving this? There's a lot of things driving it. The simplest and easiest one is that we're sitting at a 62-year low in beef cow inventory. Um, that has a lot of different variables driving it. Um, much of it stemming from drought conditions several years back. You have that. You've got all kinds of different demographic issues and labor issues and inflation issues. You've got trade and tariff issues that have come and gone and are still in flux right now. But there's a long litany of things that push that beef cow inventory down. Um, and when you have that, it takes time to recover. We know these breeding cycles are long. It's going to take time and effort to reverse that. So supply is down, prices up. What's interesting is that we're also sitting in an environment where that's going to create high prices. But when we think about demand, the demand side has held up amazingly. So we know we've had a lot of volatility in the broader markets beyond commodities, but if you think about where the demand's at, there are a lot of things going on. The economy is growing again, GDP's up, stock market's record high. There's always, whether it's clear cut or anecdotal, there's kind of the wealth effect and spillover effect. When stock market's good, beef demand's good. Well, we've got both. Despite the high prices, there's enough economic activity, there's enough wealth effect, and there's also, I would say, enough of entrenched consumers that are going to consume beef and love beef and will buy it at any price. But there's a whole new group of consumers that have come in a lot of these high protein dietary trends. And it could be anything from, fad diets, GLP-1s, social media, infused trend, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. We're seeing it across all the protein sector. And even like Amber brought up early on, we see in the whole foods, the high fat milk, the fluid milks, even the high protein, ultra filtrated milk, like all those types of things. Beef is catching on with that overall trend. So we've got, extremely constrained supply, all kinds of trade questions, screw worm, tariffs coming and going, and all our major trade partners that are impacting both the beef product coming in as well as the feeders coming in. But then we've got a strong economy, at least as far as the headline numbers are concerned, and we've got a lot of favorable consumer trends. So it is putting a situation where we've got a lot of strength behind it. But the question when folks call in is, well, how long is this going to last, right? And that tells you that there's some skepticism that it's going to stay this good. And if that's the case, what can I do to protect my cold cow value? What can I do to protect my cross calf value? And I think the point of this crystal ball over here is that, it's a fair question, but no one is able to predict these turning points with, perfect prescience here. We can say it's going to come down. I don't know when, but to try to pick a day, a time of an amount is not really feasible. It hasn't been feasible. It won't be feasible in the future. You can put all the AI models you want on it, but people and weather and markets are very unpredictable, and we just don't know. So the point is, what do we do for risk management? It's protecting ourselves against the things that we can't control, but it's also recognizing when something's good. It's that two-sided coin. With risk management, if the opportunity is great, we want to be able to grab it. If things aren't so good or could get much worse, we want to protect against that. So this is where we then move into, well, what are the tools out there? How does this new LRP tool fit into the mix for someone who says, yep, I see these are great prices. I see it's a huge contribution to my overall margin. I know it's at risk. I don't know when it's going to change, but I don't want to be sitting here, lamenting the fact that the price got cut in half. I didn't do anything, right? So that's where the LRP comes in. So when we think about what this product does for you, it's got a few really key features and benefits to it. The number one piece of the puzzle that I like right now is that it offers downside protection, while allowing for upside opportunity. So if you're familiar with the put option, it looks like a put option. If you're familiar with DRP, it looks like DRP. You set a price floor for a given premium and you maintain all the upside open. So if things stay bullish or get more bullish, you got the upside, you're out the premium. The next thing that comes into that is nothing comes without a cost. Because this is a USDA RMA product, there is a subsidy applied. So somewhere between 35 and 55% of premium is covered by Uncle Sam, which makes this really affordable and gives you a really nice risk reward trade-off between the premium you spend, the coverage level you get, and the fact you maintain the upside. And then the last really nice benefit of this product is it's easy on cash flow. If depending on what part of the market you're in, interest rates are up, cost of credit is high, cash flows can be tight. To cover these cold cows or cross calves, you can get the coverage today and you wait until the end of the period until the premium is due to the USDA or back to your AIP. So really nice from that standpoint. And it just came out. So if you're not familiar with all of this, July 1 is when it launched. There's been a lot of uptake since then, and I think there'll be more going forward. But those are kind of the basics. Before we get into any examples, I don't know if Amber, there's anything that jumps to mind, that questions or things that you'd like me to pause on.
Yes, you actually have paused at the perfect time because I was going to interrupt here in a minute.
Okay.
One of the things that, when you say something that's new, it's starting July 1. Sometimes
Yes.
that gives people a little hesitancy because it's
Mhm.
how much is this really vetted out? How much is going to change? And am I going to be the guinea pig of it? So will you give
Sure.
us a little bit of I don't want to say a history lesson, but will you
Mhm.
give us a little bit of a reassurance, I guess, on LRP and that
Sure.
well, cull cows and cross calves might be new on this. This isn't necessarily brand new. You're not going to be a guinea pig. You're not going to be falling into a trap that you just don't see yet.
Right. And that's a great question. So for all of those who are familiar with DRP, that was around from 2018 forward, and LRP actually predates that. So the LRP product's been around for a long time, and it's been used by the beef industry. And a lot of the different nuances and features and mechanics of the product have been worked out in the beef industry over time. So there's a lot of know-how on these products, and a lot of kinks have been worked out, so to speak, over time. Now, cold cows and cross calves are new, and I would say to the credit of the RMA, the IPs, the folks like us are involved, the group that put together and developed the product, spent a lot of time in speaking with the industry, understanding what the farmers' interests are, constraints are, And have spent, better, I'd say probably a minimum of a year, maybe more, working through that. So it's been around. There's been a lot of work on it. There are some details that for LRP are a little different than what you might be used to on DRP. But so long as you know about them ahead of time, there's not a whole lot to be concerned about. The other thing is like any hedging product has some degree of basis risk, as does this one. So it's a little bit like when you say, well, the premium I'm going to spend to protect a level has a trade-off. The hedging instrument I'm going to use to protect my actual market also has some kind of basis trade-off. So it's largely a matter of just coming to understand those variables and those nuances. But yeah, I can say that it's a product that looks quite good. We had some ideas about what it would look like before it come out. When the pricing came out, the premiums came out, we felt it was, as expected. And we'll look at the examples. You'll see the trade-offs are pretty favorable, at least with what's available today.
Okay. Another kind of question or maybe comment, I guess, is that
Mhm.
yes, you mentioned there are a little bit of differences between DRP and LRP here, but from the basis of what we're looking at here, it feels very familiar to those who've worked with DRP before. Is that fair enough to say that if you've worked with DRP, LRP doesn't feel like a whole new learning curve?
Right. It's very similar. And then it almost makes the differences, they stand out and they're a little easier to focus on and understand because you know the basics of, you know, premiums, cost, availability, some of the paperwork to get started, quoting methods, those types of things. So it shares a lot of familiarity. Part of what we try to do, same as we do at DRP, is to put it into terms that people are used to thinking about. So DRP people, they don't think much about indemnities and revenue and so forth, but if we put it into dollars per hundred of protection level and premium, it makes sense. Similar with LRP, say, let's put this in a dollar per head view, right? You can probably walk onto the dairy and they're going to remember pretty quick what the last truckload of Culls brought and the last, truckload of crosses bought per head. Well, if we put the protection in those terms and we put the premiums in those terms, it's pretty easy to understand where we're at. So some of that can get to be lost or a mess in just the basics of the insurance world, but we distill that down and that's available, to anybody to reframe it in those terms to make it easy to understand.
Okay, I definitely have some more questions, but I think it's going to be more beneficial right now to keep going, get into a little bit of the nitty-gritty of the LRP before I dive into some of those. So I'll let you keep going here, Will.
Perfect. Okay, so we'll do two examples. First, we'll look at culls and then we'll look at crosses. So when we think about the cull cows, this goes a little bit into that basis story. So here you can see that if you think about those cull cow prices and those feeder cattle prices, between futures and culls, um, there's a pretty decent correlation. You can see it kind of diverges from the trend line over time, but it gives us some ideas that there's a relationship between what a cull cow's worth and maybe what the futures market's worth. Now, just be clear, this isn't off fed cattle. This is off feeder cattle. It's how the program runs. And what happens with this is that USD RMA over time and on an ongoing basis creates a multiplier, which kind of drives this correlation. So we say somewhere between zero point 0.4 and 0.5x, the feeder cattle market is roughly where these cull cow values are going to come into play. So that then becomes when you take out coverage, that multiplier becomes something that's fixed. It's the time you take the coverage out. So we're not going to run out into the market and say, I'm going to wait for a USDA print on cull values. We're going to say, hey, how do cull values compare to feeders? We've got a futures curve for feeders so we can see forward prices. We'll put a multiplier on it. We'll project out a projected value. We'll project out a coverage level. We'll provide a premium. And then when it comes time to settle it, we'll use that same multiplier against the feeder cattle market. So this is an example where, a big question is, well, what's my basis risk? Your basis risk is really what is your cash price versus this feeder market times a multiplier. So we'll get into a little bit more on that, but That's a key piece of the puzzle here. What actually are we pricing this against? So this is where we start. You can see it's a pretty good fit. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. And in our view, it's a great place to start, especially when you're at a record high, and especially when it's a minimum price tool, because the correlation is not perfect and it goes to the upside, your static premium. The correlation is not perfect and it goes to the downside. You're glad to be protected. You're probably not going to sweat a little bit of basis risk. And along the way, it was subsidized and had all those cash flow advantages too. So that's a little bit about the pricing that's used on these calls. So if we think about what's available to you with this specific type of LRP, like I said, there's all kinds of other, traditional beef cattle LRP. When we think about dairy culls, you can do up to 25,000 head a year. This product is restricted to being available 13 weeks forward. So every day there's a new 13-week forward coverage period. It's probably our only quibble with the program. We would have loved if RMA would have approved this out a year out, like the cross calves we'll see, but that's what they started with. It's available every day, CME's trading except for holidays and USDA report days, or if there's a limit move, it may not be available. So that's kind of the availability of what you're able to get coverage on. If we think about an example, we say, hey, we're sitting here in August. We want to protect 100 head of culls. They're going to be 1,400 pounds when they go to market. We're in a 13-week window, so those would be culls that go to market in November. Well, what does that look like? Well, we take the feeder price out there is 330, turn that into dollars from dollars per hundredweight to dollars per pound. Turns out the multiplier USCRMA came out with yesterday was a 0.43. Put it against 1,400 bucks a pound, $1,400 per head on those culls that go to market. And that lands at a forward price of just shy of 2,000 bucks per head for a cull. So that's pretty close to that chart we showed earlier. It's probably pretty close to what you're seeing coming and going on your market. Depends where you're located, freight, depends on the day of the week, what have you, but it's in the ballpark of where cull should be. So that's the forward price RMA is starting with. Next is, well, what level do we want to protect? For this example, we're using 93% level. That means if the market out in front is around 1996, we come in a little below the market at 1846. That's our minimum. That's our floor. There's a lot of different levels you can choose from. We use this one in a lot of examples and in real life as well because it hits a subsidy tier at 40% subsidy, which we like. You could go higher, 95%, 98%, 100%. And those are choices that you would look to make as you're developing your strategy. But for this example, we're using 93%. If we figure, well, what does the premium look like on the exchange? It'd probably be about just under 4.5 bucks a hundred to buy a similar put on the exchange. You pull the subsidy in, that's about $1.80 a subsidy. You look at where that lands through the formula, it gets you about 16 bucks a head of premium. So for $16 a head, you can protect 1846. In my mind, that's a really favorable trade-off given the value of that animal. So that's the mechanics on a given position of how the levels arrive. This is a snapshot of our quote tool, which can help you for cull cows. They're all a 13-week end date, you'll see on the far left. But then this coverage column in the middle, you can choose different coverage levels. So you could go anywhere from 100%, that protects you right at the money. 1996 is where the price is projected. You can cover 1996, it's going to cost you 54 bucks a head to do it. You come down to a 95% level, that's where the vast majority of DRP is covered. That would be like an 1896 for 26 a head. You can go one rung lower and you get an extra 5 points on subsidy. And now you're at an 1846 for 1627. So there's trade-offs up and down the spectrum. But in this example, we grabbed that 93%. Again, looks pretty attractive. If we think about how that might play out, we say, well, here's where the prices have been going for a while, looking out no futures. And let's say we're going to put that minimum price in, like we just talked, which was 1846 minimum. So they're going to grab that minimum. And if prices go up, well, we're pretty happy because the price increased. In this example, feeders went up to 360. We're getting 21.77 a head for our culls. We're out 16 bucks a premium. We got all the upside. No one's going to remember that $16. Pretty happy. Now, On the opposite side of the coin, put our minimum out there with the LRP. Uh-oh, prices dropped sharply down to 250, which is still a high price if you think about it. But that's not a drop we want to see right now. But we're protected with our floor, and now we're coming in at that coverage level of 1846. We're going to get it. We're going to be able to make a claim, less our premium, to be protected at that level. So it shows you the flexibility you're getting in two scenarios. And people say, well, what might happen? These could happen very easily between now and November. It could be an even wider spread. I think we all kind of know that right now. Even if you're very pessimistic or very bullish in the market, I think everyone realizes that the range of outcomes right now is very wide as to what could happen. So now it comes time to make a claim. And the claim process here is that we have to demonstrate we had an insurable interest in these cull cows. So you're going to need some documentation. You're going to need a sale record, okay? And that's going to have your name, the buyer, when you sold it, the number of head. The weight's optional. You can also have other records showing ownership, third-party ownership. And you're going to demonstrate that you made the sale plus or minus 60 days of the coverage end date. So you've got a lot of flexibility to pull cattle ahead or reach in the past and pull them ahead to make a claim, or reach out in front of that end date and use them to make a claim. We work with clients to ladder into positions and track them in a way that makes it legible as to how many you've got covered for where your calendar months are at. But this is pretty nice. You got a 60-day window to figure that out. If there's a claim, you get a DocuSign. At least from us, you get a DocuSign, you fill it out, it gets reviewed, everything looks good, you get paid out. What's a little different here is like with DRP, you're used to providing milk settlement sheets, milk checks, and you've got some flexibility with a protection factor and an 85% level and so forth. With this, if you put out that you covered 100 head, you have to demonstrate that you had 100 head in that window. There's not much room to wiggle beyond just reaching forward or back on that time frame. So that's an important distinction. It's a little different. So it does become something that's important to track. But this is basically the process. One of the things we'll do with clients is say, hey, show me your sales records ahead of time. If it looks good, no sweat. If it's missing some of that info, you can go to your buyer and say, hey, can you add this to my documentation? So that's the cull side. I'm going to do something very similar on the cross calves. I don't know if you had any questions on the culls, Amber, that come to mind.
Yes. Yep, I mean, when we're talking about, you have 60 days within the coverage time frame, and you have 13 weeks that it goes out, which in some cases it would be nice to go a little farther out. But I think about how we have a lot of different dairy farms, and some of those farms are really good at knowing the number of culls they're going to have, what their replacement number is, and how many are coming in and out of the herd every single month. Others, I think about how it definitely can vary depending on what the cows are like, what's going on the farm, and in some places you're trying to build up more of a stock depending on where you're at in the phase of if you're expanding or not. And so, with all of that being said, how do you go about kind of making sure that if you, like you said, if you have 100 cows that are in this contract, that you're meeting what is there to make sure that you are getting the LRP?
Right, and that's a great question. So a lot of clients will have a number of tools they're working to track that, and they may do some manual spreadsheets on it and share it, and they're comfortable with it. Other clients, we work with our new farm business management team that I mentioned that we teamed up with in New York, where they're kind of experts in pulling the dairy comp data, running specific reports, throwing it into a formatted spreadsheet and saying, okay, here's where we see the flows at. Let's look back at some history on, we'll call it shrink, death loss. We may say, how much we're missing. Maybe we're missing by a week on, breeding cycles and timelines, whatever it may be. So putting some factor in there to be conservative. So it's a matter of working with the systems you have and getting it into some sort of format where it's easy to project out, and then applying some, those just use death loss as the simplest one, applying that in and say, okay, that's a good conservative number. And then also taking into account, like, did you have breeding holes further back? Are you pushing in this direction to replenish your heifer pipeline in this window, having some of that context around, well, let's not just use the last 3-year average. Let's use what's in dairy comp, or let's use what's in your plan, or both those in conjunction. So it's something that some people have just ready to go. In other cases, something we help them kind of walk through the steps on it.
And then another part of the question is, depending on your farm size, you're thinking, oh my gosh, I mean, I know we used 100 as an example. And they're like, I do not have that many cows going out. How many does it actually, I don't want to say make it worthwhile to do
Yeah.
LRP? Or is there a minimum number that you need to meet?
No, that's a great question. If you've got 10 per month, great. We'll do 10. If you want, I don't know if I would do one per month. Might be a little bit of paperwork, but I think you'd have more than that anyway. But yeah, you could do, you're stuck at the 25,000 per year, so you can back that into a per month value of full math there. But yeah, you can scale this to any size. And really, we've seen a lot of consolidation in the industry and all these other things, and there's like certain clusters of sizes of dairies throughout the market, but you could be a really large dairy, or you could be a medium to small size dairy. And to me, at the end of the day, the value is in this tool to really protect yourself. So if you're milking 500 cows, you've got, a lot of risk in beef. And if you're milking 5,000 cows, you've got a lot of risk in beef. It just happens to be a different number of zeros. And this tool will work for either participant.
Well, I appreciate that, not only from the perspective of this works for everybody, but also the idea that, it is possible, even if you might have to, do a little bit more work on the front end to figure out some of these numbers. But it definitely sounds like there's a lot of worthwhile in it when it comes to thinking about, okay, what do I got for call animals and how can I make sure that that price is going to stay there? But we have a question
Right.
that came in, and I think
Sure.
it can read to both call cows and calves, and this one reads specifically to calves. But I
Hmm.
want to ask it in terms of when it comes to cull cows, because
Sure.
the question reads, right now beef price is high, and I've heard it will likely be this way for several years since you can't get a new beef herd built in only a few. Give me the top reason to do LRP for calves when it's only a year out and prices are still high. But I want to change that to, why would you want to do this for cull cows when it's only up to 13 weeks out?
Right.
Prices
And that's
are,
a
in theory, going to change less than they will in a year from now.
Right. And that is a fantastic question. So I think we'll address the other one separately, but I think that's where, when I highlighted, we like pretty much everything about these two products. The one that kind of we would like to see change is that 13-week reach, because when it comes to risk management, we're really trying to buy time, and we're trying to either capture value or protect value. And when we think about bouncing off record highs, the old rule of thumb in any of these hedging approaches, whether it's cattle, energy, corn, beans, milk, whatever, when you push those extremes, you want to get as much reach as you can. So if this turns, we're definitely in a position where we prefer to be in a position where we have as much reach as possible. So that's what I'd say. I wouldn't disqualify using the cold cow product. I think it can be part of the mix. But frankly, a lot of our clients just go out and say, well, I'll skip the subsidy. I'm just going to use the CME tool. I'm going to buy a put option, and I'm going to use it to cover the beef value of my culls. And there you can get out into next year. So that, I do believe, even though we're talking about LRP, that is a shortcoming of the cold cow LRP, but we can solve it with a different tool. And in a lot of ways, we want to be agnostic to the tool. Like if you can get a cash contract, great. You may not want to give up the upside. You probably can't get it for Coles anyway. So what's your next option? Well, CME, LRP. LRP is constrained on reach, record high. I'd rather have reach. Maybe we want to use CME for Coles. So you've hit on a few important things there, which it kind of goes back to what you originally started with. Are there some things where you're like, I'm going to be a guinea pig if I use this? Well, yeah, you might infer that it's a good program, and it is, but it may have a shortcoming in a certain area. I'd say that's one. So then you go back and you look at the rest of your toolbox. Now, when it comes to cross calves, you can get up to 52 weeks of reach. So we'll look at that one.
I think that's a great thing to acknowledge and understand is that yes, there's ways you can do LRP with your call cows. There's also other alternatives depending on the route you want to take. Just depends
Right.
on who you are. And I don't want to say how much you want to dive into it, but a little bit of how nitty gritty and deep into the woods do you want to go from the sounds of it.
That's right. And that's our job. Our job is to educate on all the tools that are out there. And, I think any dairy producer should say, I want to at least have the full toolbox. I don't want to be hamstrung by not being able to reach in. But you don't want to reach in and grab a tool you don't know how to use. That's onus is on us to provide that education. And frankly, like, what your group is doing to bring these educational opportunities out, it's important to do that work.
Well, I couldn't agree more. Also, a little biased on that front. But with that being said, let's dive into some of the cross calf information.
Yep. So when we think about the crosses, you might remember that correlation on what we saw with the Culls was a little more straightforward. This one's got a little bend in the curve. It's a pretty decent fit here, but it's not perfect. The multiplier can vary to a degree. It has varied since it's come out. We're also in a little bit of a newer era where these crosses haven't been around as long, and they haven't, even if they have been around, they haven't been around as much volume and as much penetration into the market. So this correlation is evolving. We feel pretty good about where these multipliers have come in and landed since the start of the program. USDRMA is gonna adjust those and update them over time. And I think that that's part of what these insurance products do is they try to get as good an actuarial fit as they can. We feel like it's starting off pretty good, but we're also recognizing that it's new. So when we think about, well, where's it at today? We'll look at some quotes and some examples. So as far as availability, this tool only works for crosses. If you're selling a Holstein bull calf, you're out of luck. If you're selling a Wagyu Holstein cross, if you're selling an Angus Jersey cross, whatever it is, you can apply it here. There may be a little nuance if we get into the Jersey side. Happy to talk about that later. But I think as far as looking at it, if you've got a cross, you can come in here, you can cover up to 25,000 a year. We've got that 13 to 52 week window. We can reach out. Same availability on most trading days, unless there's a holiday limit move or report. And if we think about how this goes, this is taking the real prices from yesterday, looking out in front of us. That multiplier landed around 3.7-ish, which got us to a just under $1,200 head forward price, 1195 projected price. That's really close to what we're seeing out in the country. Again, mileage may vary. Everybody loves to talk about a few they sold to 1507, but 1250, 1200 seems pretty good. We can come in here at the 93% again, put an 1105 floor price under that per head. Looks pretty attractive. We look at the CME, you got some pretty sizable subsidies embedded in, 40%. It's going to cost you about 19 bucks a head to get that done. So if you got roughly a $1,200 opportunity out in front of you, and you want to cover an $1,100 minimum, it's going to cost you about 20 bucks to do it. When we think about this quote, and this is live from yesterday, it is a little different than the one before because instead of every week being the same, you can see it was available from 13 out to 43 weeks. RMA has discretion to offer it in the 47 and 52 week window. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. At the moment, you can go out 43 weeks. That's where we're at. This shows you the end dates. And in this example, we did 100 head a month as an example, and that's what rolls up into these final coverage levels and premiums. You can see it varies out across the curve what that projected price is, anywhere from $1,000 to $1,400, depending on what the futures prices look like. But again, 1195 current price, 1105 floor, 19 and change for premium. Same story holds here. We put our minimum in, the price goes up, we're thrilled. We're going to realize 1,300 plus. We're going to be out our premium. No one's going to sweat it. Everyone's going to be happy. On the converse, we come in, we set our minimum price. We don't know what variables are going to unfold. It drops down sub 900. Well, we're protected at 1105 minus the premium. So pretty straightforward minimum price tool. Um, and really to cover that amount of value for under 20 bucks a head, to me is pretty compelling, especially when you consider how much that total new revenue and profit contribution is coming from these. Um, this one's a little bit different on the claims process. Two things I'd highlight is that you've got plus or minus 30 days to settle this one. And then the other thing is on these sales records, it has to say it's a cross. So that we've seen in some cases, sales records for cross calves vary quite widely in our experience. Sometimes it's a check with a memo, sometimes it's a sticky note. Sometimes it's a really fancy statement from a big buyer. But we definitely need it to show the seller's name, date, number of head, and the type. And the type needs to say it's a cross if it was a cross. So we've been working on with that with folks to just double check it before we, whether I have a claim or not, it's good to get that paperwork in order. Um, so that's kind of how the claims process works on the crosses. Um, Before I touch on this last little benefit of timing and everything, I don't know if there's any questions you might have had, Amber, on the cross calves.
So let's go back to that question that I kind of finagled into making work for cull cows and ask it for the calf side of things,
Yep.
especially, with beef prices being high, knowing that there's probably a lot of upside still in the next, few years. Obviously, things can always change, but
hmm
that's what we're being told. So give them the top reason to do LRP for calves when it's only a year out and prices are expected to still be high.
Sure. And the top reason is we might be wrong, right? So risk management is about taking something we know, which it is high and is contributing a lot, and grabbing some aspect of it, and beyond that is that there may be a broad consensus in the industry that this is the biggest bull market that's ever existed. And by the time you reach peak enthusiasm, nobody wants to believe or can believe it'll change. And ultimately, that's about the time it changes. So I know it will revert. I don't know when. You know, this is coming down to can we do something proactive for that eventuality if and when it does turn? And if we keep laddering out and getting reach, we know that we'll be protected when it does. So it's more of a question of, if we can't confidently predict exact highs and lows and dates of turning points, what do we do to take advantage of something that is favorable in front of us? That's what's available to us now. The one thing that I kind of use to challenge people, and look, I can paint a lot of pictures where it says bullish for several years. Like it wouldn't surprise me. So don't mishear that either. Um, I don't know, but I do know it's really good, and I don't want it to slip away. But the one that I challenge people on is that if we go back, I would say almost a year, but for sure, let's say we went back 10 months ago and we said, well, hey, what's the story right now for dairy cow numbers? And I think you could have went through the industry and you could have found broad consensus that because we're at the lowest replacement ratio ever and beef is high, we weren't going to have enough replacements and we're going to cull every animal and we're going to be so short on milk cows that, lots of wild ideas about what that milk price could look like for 2025. So I think if you objectively look back at what the industry is talking about, the consensus during that window, that's where it was at. Now we go back to the last milk production report, and what have we found? 150,000 head. Wait a second. How does that square with what was going on in that consensus? Well, it doesn't. Things changed. Dairymen found a way to respond to that situation by either, you know, finding more replacements than were in the numbers, which is always a thing that can happen, and then just hacking the cull rate back to levels that no one thought they could really run at for a sustained period. Now they may not be able to keep it that way. We'll see. There's a lot of good genetics and practices and management practices being uncovered by keeping these older cows around, but the herd increased nevertheless. So the prices drew out an increase in environment we thought it wouldn't happen. There's a lot of things that are trying to push something similar to occur in the beef side of the equation. So that's one thing. You could have, that's just on the supply side. Now, people may also remember what happened in the egg market. Well, the egg market hit whatever, a dozen bucks a dozen, right? A dozen. That's not very cheap. Well, what happened? It collapsed. It's still really high wholesale, but it collapsed because we allowed imports that weren't allowed before. Okay. Can that happen in beef? Yes, no, maybe. We're in the midst of a lot of very thorny trade negotiations and screwworm things going on, but all those can change and they can change quickly. So that could be another variable. And the last one is, I showed a record stock market and 3% GDP. All that can change in 6 months' time. It doesn't take much for a recession, and everyone in dairy knows this. It doesn't take much for a recession to really hit high value food commodities hard. We in dairy are very blessed by having a product that's close to the plate, butter, milk, cheese, very minimal processing, very high value, still very close to the farm, but it comes with a double-edged sword when the economy takes a turn. Those are expensive things in the grocery store and they get hit disproportionately hard. Now do that on an $80 ribeye at the restaurant. How long does that last? So there's always push and pull. And then there's the list of things we don't even know what they could be. Nobody knew COVID was coming, right? So it could be anything like that. Um, it's a matter of just being agnostic to the absolute turn and recognizing that there's a lot of risk, but there's a lot of opportunity. And we just say, well, for X premium, I'm not letting it get away, and I'll go on to run my business best I can, and I won't worry about that, big surprise that comes later.
I appreciate, I think one of the phrases that you said, the story can always change. And I think that we all know that all too well. It's just where do you want the story to change to be and how much do you want to potentially help yourself in that process? We had another question come in, and this is definitely a crystal ball type question here, especially that adding cross calves to the LRP and cull calves is new. But this one reads, do you think dairy bull calves will ever be added to LRP?
Um, Possibly. My gut feeling is that we're just going to see more and more trend to the crosses. I think it's just going to become pervasive. Um, One of the reasons, which is maybe undervalued amongst dairy producers, is that when we work with a lot of beef producers and within the firm with opinions, probably one of the biggest providers in the financial side to the beef industry. And the beef folks we work with, they really like these cross calves. It's become something that as they've integrated them into their systems, they like them for a lot of different reasons, from, the consistency of the flows, the timing, the consistency animal to animal, the logistics, and now the performance. And now finding out, how to get them to grade, how to manage them, how to feed them. So the system is becoming dialed in. And when you think about on the dairy, when you can drive more consistency, you get good performance. And if you think about the variability and the variance and what might be coming in, just on feeders in the beef industry, they could be coming from a lot of different sources with a lot of different timelines and a lot of different sizes and a lot of variability. And you start to plug into the cross calf market, you're looking at some pretty clockwork setups where people uh, are starting to really get the value out of it, and they're going to become more interested in it, in my opinion. So while it may become a tool, I would argue that more than likely the industry is just going to go the other way, and it's just going to be all crosses, and you're just going to balance crosses versus your heifer pipeline. That's my opinion, but we'll see.
No, I appreciate that, especially having the fact that you work with such a variety of producers, not only on the dairy side, but beef and all across, and just having that insight. It's very interesting. But for now, I'll let you keep going here because I know we've got a couple more things to discuss, and then we will get to the last couple questions.
Yeah, and we're just about done. I think we've hit the meat of it. This one I do mention just because the premiums are paid after the insurance ends. This is handy on cash flow. Nobody likes these high interest rates and credit lines at the moment. So, if you take this coverage out, looking way out in front, this one was saying, hey, I'm going to take coverage now out to March, and you really don't have to pay until the end of May. So you're covered from today until March. And if there's no claim, you're paying the premium end of May. That's about as easy as it gets on financing that's baked into something. So it's worth mentioning. It's probably worth a few points of extra premium just on the interest savings alone. And it's been handy in a market that's pretty stretched for guys when it comes to, looking where credit lines are at right now. So that is worth noting. Last couple of slides are just a getting started and what do I do next? And just a little bit of a recap. So the getting started part is really saying, look, there's a lot of opinions out there. I'm going to come in and I'm going to acknowledge the opportunity. We know that it's a high price. We know it's a huge amount of revenue. We know it's a huge contribution to profit. We also know it's risky. Risk and reward are linked. You don't get the high price without some high risk, and we've got that. And it's always high prices cure high prices. It's going to happen. We don't know when. Let's be proactive about it. We talked about the exposure. Don't sleep on how much value beef has in your profitability and your contribution there. If that's something you're not familiar with, like digging into the financials and breaking out, that's something we do. We can help you walk through that. And then the last part goes back to the tools, and I think Amber, you highlight it nicely in the question from the audience on the Culls, like sometimes this might not be the best tool. That's okay. If we've got cash contracts, let's use them. If we got futures and options that are better fit, we'll use them. This beef on dairy LRP at the moment is a really good tool. It's simple, it's cost effective, it gives you the upside open. It works fantastically on these crosses at the moment. So, you go through cycles. Each one of these are going to have their place. And then they have a different place for a different producer based on what they're comfortable with or how their operation works, where they're located. That's all right. I would say right now, time and place, LRP it's right in that sweet spot, especially for the crosses. So those are some key points on where we're at to get going on this. It's a lot like DRP. You just set up a new policy. You can't use your DRP policy. You have to have an LRP policy, and you can open that up. It doesn't obligate you to do anything, but you have to have it before you take out coverage. You do need to get your numbers in order. So that's a little bit of this questionnaire. Like if we're working with you, we're going to walk through and say, hey, let's look at the dairy comp. Let's look at your flows. Let's make sure we understand where we're at. Let's get a sense of what amount of contribution to your margin this has. And then the end stage is to pull the trigger on it. It's like buying a put. It's like buying a DRP. You see the daily pricing, you choose what you want to do, and then you pull the trigger on it. So that's kind of the pretty simple steps of what you need to do to actually use the tool. And yeah, if anyone is interested, we've got a quote platform that's out there. It lets you put your information in, see the quotes. I had snapshots of it. And if you can just reach out to me, more than welcome. We'll set you up with a demo so you can kind of look and play around with these prices. We're here as a resource, provide education on these things. There's some fine details. The big broad brush strokes it's going to work really well. So long as you understand the trade-offs and you get your data organized and in play. And we're more than happy to talk anybody through that. Yeah, and appreciate the opportunity and any other questions that may be out there.
So, Will, just a couple more questions before we wrap up here. But I think one
Yep.
of the questions that, as a dairy producer and somebody who's thinking about, okay, maybe this is an option for me. I know it's only been out for about a month or so, but from your perspective, for somebody who might be looking to dive into this and really get their feet wet, what makes somebody successful when they're going into LRP and when they're really trying to make sure that they're doing what's best for their business?
Yeah. So step one, make sure you understand where these tools are at. What the nuances are. Take your time to understand them. The next part is like, even though we may be lured in by a wild high market, take a step back and think about it from a margin perspective. Do you have a good grasp on where your margins are at, where your flows are at, how this is contributing? So really, really come at it and think about it from a margin perspective. And then consider, how am I going to use this in the long term? You know, we can think about coming in here today when it's, say like you pick your analogy, like it's a layup, it's a slam dunk, it's a home run, whatever. It's something in that bucket, I think, when you're at these prices to at least get started and to learn it. But really where you want to get in the end state is a consistent hedging program. Those are the ones that our clients, that have been doing risk management for 20, 30 years, the ones that are really have performed well. They've got some variety in their approach, but the common variable is that they're consistent. So we would say, hey, how am I going to make this part of what I'm doing consistently within risk management? Do I have a plan for that? Am I going to set up systems and approaches to know where I stand financially, to look at these opportunities and to apply them consistently? That's where you want to get to. If you're not there now, or you've had some inconsistency along the way, a lot of times when you see a new tool like this, it can allow you to say, okay, let's bring it into our program, kind of revisit where we're at, because we may not even be thinking about how we're managing our milk risk correctly, because we're not looking at the margin and how much beef is impacting it. We may just be making some unforced errors in that regard. So having this come out gives you an opportunity to revisit and really, use it as a way to come back at your overall risk management approach. And, the thing I'll just hit on again and again is you got to find a way to be consistent in this, because we just don't know when the turns will occur. We know they do occur. We know they have occurred, that they're going to occur. We don't know when. And the folks that have kept a consistent strategy, even if it varies in the premium they spend, the amount they cover, whatever it is, whatever fits their risk tolerance, their business, if you lay into it over and over in a consistent way, it's going to give you a good outcome in the end.
I appreciate the consistency is key. We all know that that is all too true on dairy farming, but it sounds like it's definitely something to keep going on when it comes to risk management opportunities as well. And then Will, last question for you today. When we're talking specifically LRP, cull cows, and cross calves, what is one thing that you want producers to be thinking about or actively doing after today's discussion?
I think the thing I'd say is if you haven't done it, go through the steps. And even if you do it on a small amount to try it and get your feet wet, that is always the best plan. We can talk about theoretical things, but the day you transact and the day you send in a premium check or the day you make a claim, if it's on those 10 head, even if you got 100 a month, you're going to learn an incredible amount in the process. So I think don't be afraid to start small, especially on something that your maximum you can be out is the premium, right? That's your maximum risk. That's your maximum buy-in for education. So I would say that if anyone's learning anything in risk management, you can read every book on earth, but if you buy one contract or you take out one endorsement, you'll learn twice as much, twice as fast. So don't be afraid to give it a try. You can do it in a limited way. And it's going to just accelerate your learning curve on it. So that would be my encouragement for anybody who's kind of window shopping the idea. Don't be afraid to dip your toe in, and not just intellectually and on paper, but do it with a position so you can learn it in real time.
And it sounds like now's the time to be able to do some of that learning because it's easier to do it when the prices are high than when you're feeling the pennies being pinched together when the prices are low.
That's right. We're playing offense here, which is always more fun.
Yes, most definitely. But Will, I have to say thank you so much for not only bringing us this information, but really giving us some good examples and insight on how this could potentially apply to our farm. So much appreciated having you here this afternoon. It's been fun.
Thank you, Amber. It's a great opportunity to talk with you. And as I said, you've really done a nice job in bringing that perspective of dairy farm in your questions and moderating this. So I appreciate that.
Well, thank you. I also have to say, before we end up and wrap up here quick, a huge thank you as well, once again, to DMI, Your Dairy Checkoff, for supporting the Dairy Signal. And we have a lot of great things that are always happening in the world of professional dairy producers. And you can head over to our website at pdpw.org to learn more. But for now, have a great rest of your day. And we'll see you here Thursday on the Dairy Signal. Bye now.